And thanks also to Kim and the SASPA HR group for organising the day. Just sitting there on our table, you're sort of blown away by just the different types of approaches schools are using. So I'd like to also thank the presenters so far for sharing their schools and sharing their thinking around what their timetables currently are and what they might look like in the future. I'd also like to just thank Annette Ryan as well for supporting me in my preparation and thinking around what it means for Year 7s into high school. So what does it actually mean when we're talking about that? We've heard little bits of it today, and so what I want to do, because I'll acknowledge that there's some people who are really expertise in having Year 7s in schools, and particularly some of the schools that are preschool to 12 already have Year 7s in high school, and there's also other schools that also have Year 7s in high school already. So I acknowledge that, but there may also be people here that are brand new timetablers and just been dragged along today. You might find something interesting out of this. So hopefully I'll sort of talk through some concepts that will help most people. I want to just acknowledge a key theme coming through from the presenters is that timetabling is complex. There's also always trade-offs, as Richard sort of talked about in his presentation. And so in that, what does it actually mean for preparing our schools to bring Year 7s in? What are the trade-offs? What are the opportunities for us as we sort of do our planning? What we learnt from the pilot schools, Year 7 to high school pilot schools, so Wirianda, John Perry and Mitcham Girls, is that the context is all different, the approaches are all different. And we've learnt different things from all of the schools, and so it's, I guess, opportunities like today give us an opportunity to hear from a range of different schools, not just the 4 case study schools, but the people around your table. And then when we did the sharing, we've heard from a lot of different people today, so which is great. Peter said something right at the very beginning and around timetables, and that was there's no right answer. And so we really do have to think about what that means in our context, in our culture, and how we structure that. So the other thing in terms of our context, whether it be P to 12 or 7 to 12 in the future, is thinking about what is our stage of improvement. And we did hear about that, particularly in Roger's presentation around, he talked about a few different things, but in terms of where he was at in his improvement journey. And I think that's a really critical piece, because there's some people in the room that would listening to Alistair and what he's got happening at Adelaide Botanic go, oh my goodness, we can't do that. And I guess that's that readiness piece that we need to be thinking about in our planning and in our thinking around how do we do this change management for 7 to high school, because we do carry baggage, and we're not all in a brand new school. So how do we, I guess, navigate that journey? Roger was also really clear on what are we going after in terms of the why, and we heard the why come through from many of our presenters. So the why are we doing this? What do we actually need to do, and how do we cater? In obviously my focus is around Year 7s, but more broadly, how do we also cater for Year 8s and 9s and 10, 11, 12s as well? But considering as well, what does it mean for those students that are coming into our school? So I really liked what Richard was talking about, his whole curriculum structure, reflecting back to Year 5s and 6s, to really thinking about what does it look like with the curriculum and the mapping that happens back to our feeder schools. I really like that. And with the P to 12 schools, they've got the luxury of having potentially some of their Year 7 cohort coming in and some of their primary teachers to work with and talk through some of those ideas. I guess the other part to it is, particularly around Year 7s, is thinking about, certainly from some of the literature, is there less teachers, less movement, less students to know. We've heard some of those concepts through today. But a real focus on knowing learners. So, I think some of those things are the guiding principles and things that underpin how we shape our timetables as we're sort of developing them. And so what are the other things in terms of the principles that guide the curriculum delivery and timetable? So something that has obviously just been launched is the new curriculum documents. And I think the principle behind that is that viable and guaranteed curriculum being really important. And so what we've heard about today is some really aspirational stuff, but we also need to go back and go, well, where's our school at along that improvement journey? Do we have that viable and guaranteed curriculum? Yes or no? And so where are we at in terms of some of that aspirational stuff that we've heard? Obviously, consideration around pathways, in particular vet and career development that Tim's going to talk about. But I think really importantly, particularly in this sort of COVID normal that we're sort of in at the moment, is that well-being and how do we support students. And certainly in my visits to schools, I'm hearing about well-being as a major concern. So how do we structure our schools to, one, deliver the achievement goals that we want to deliver, but also the well-being goals and also the pathway goals? So what does this look like, and how does this inform school structure, particularly using the timetable as that lever for change which we've heard about, or lever for improvement that we've heard about? So there's the three key concepts that we've sort of been hearing about today. One is about how do we use people as one of those levers. How do we use place? So, and that's both the built. So I know Alistair talks particularly around that built and really thinking about what do our buildings look like. In every school, the buildings are very different. Some may look a little bit similar, some of the old 60s buildings, or it depends on the area of the school. So some of the buildings at Christie's look really similar to Paralawi, but it doesn't mean they're the same. So how do we use those in our context? But also for Year 7s is the outdoor spaces are really important. So how do we think about the way we use our timetable to organise groups of students or groups of staff so that we can think about some of those things that we talked about in terms of what we're going after, whether it's less teachers, less movement, to really help us to create a really strong, positive culture in our schools. And so obviously what does this look like in an R to 12 school is quite different to what it could look like in a 7 to 12 school. So I mentioned about the new curriculum documentation, ensuring that there's complete coverage of the curriculum, and we've heard about that 80% and having some flexibility with the 20%. And so Richard's, I guess, use of the flexibility is different to some of the other presentations that we've heard about. One of the things that certainly come out, and I spoke to Ken Loughton about this last week or a couple of weeks ago, and he was really clear on the use of those new curriculum documents is really important, but if you aren't going to use them, then your curriculum documentation must be equal or better to those curriculum documents. So I think that's a challenge for us to make sure that we do have really strong curriculum documentation in our schools. This might not be the timetable bit, but I think it's really important in our thinking and our planning. So that curriculum documentation, and how do we do that, and how does, I guess, technology help us with that? So I guess what I'm saying around that is that there's certain conditions that need to be addressed before launching into those innovative timetabling models. And I think Roger's shaking his head, and the conversations that we've had, he's talked about this is where we're at the moment, and we're just continuing on our path of improvement. And so when we're ready for that next step, we'll take that next step. The other really important factor, particularly relating to people and the use of people, is making sure that we have the best teachers teaching the kids. We need to also think about what connects students to school and adults and peers. So how do we potentially use the timetable to create opportunities to create those stronger relationships, stronger connections? So if a kid's coming in at Year 7 highly anxious and then is given a timetable where they are in 7 different rooms with 7 different teachers, what does that look like for that kid as opposed to a kid that's, from some of the examples we've heard where they do have 2 core teachers? or less teachers working with them, so they have stronger connections, maybe with the same kids, so that there's stronger relationships as well. In this COVID normal, how do we ensure that the use of technology in our schools supports that curriculum delivery as well? And so what I liked about certainly some of the presentations was that there's a teaching and learning framework. Alistair talked about his charter, so those guiding principles that really informs how we develop our timetables, because it comes back to what are the trade-offs. So what are we giving up for something else? So one of the things I really liked from Richard's presentation was the induction, immersion and connection semester. And I know at Ranella we brought our Year 7s into high school for the start of this year, and we sort of had a similar concept around one semester, particularly to start the year, which we've called our inquiry subject, which is essentially, sounds like it's pretty similar to what Seton are doing, and I think that's helped to, I guess, bridge that gap from primary into high school and create a sense of high school readiness, and then on working backwards, it's working back with our feeder schools to go, what's that school readiness piece or high school readiness piece that the primary schools are responsible for as well. On the teaching and learning frameworks, I think it's important just to revisit this diagram from Alan Reid's presentation at the SASPA conference. Was it last year, Peter? Year before, 2018. And I think this was one of those things that in our inquiry subject we looked at some of the key things that make up that contemporary curriculum. So thinking about the meta learning, so what's that aspect of learning that students need to know, and that independent learning, that meta learning that they need to know to prepare them for success in high school. So we thought our inquiry subject helped with that. We're really mindful that, and Alan was really reinforced the importance of that disciplinary curriculum and being really clear. And I think the new curriculum documentation really makes us remember that that is really important. At the same time, there is that interdisciplinary learning that we have to do as well, and prepare our kids for working across disciplines, and obviously the capability. So I think that's, in terms of as schools are redeveloping or shaping up their teaching and learning frameworks, this is a really useful document. And obviously there's I guess a bit of an example also from Alan Reid. I also wanted to share the SASPA Leading World-Class Teaching and Learning paper, because I think there's some useful things in there to frame a teaching and learning framework. And as we're sort of working through the implementation of 7 to high school, I think this is a really key document. And so if you haven't had a good look at it, there's some things in there, particularly around leading the high school move, so leading the 7 to high school move, that will give you some ideas as to how to progress. Also, in terms of student wellbeing and setting students up for success and developing those safe and supportive learning environments that we've heard about this morning as well, creating that really strong sense of belonging. So how do we, I guess, use the timetable to embed some of those ideas into the culture of our schools? At the same time, growing that positive learner identity within those years 7, 8, 9 years in preparation for SACE. And Roger, in his 7 to high school video, he talked about the 7 to high school move is one of their SACE improvement strategies. So with thinking about it like that and Roger shared his chart. So, and the other part to the teaching and learning guide is the aligning curriculum, teaching and learning. So particularly around some of the evidence of what works. So I talked about people, so the structures of people. So teaching, teaming is really important. We've heard about examples of that today. And that obviously teacher teaming and creating a strong sense of teams within the school helps to build that stronger relationships and develop a really strong culture. Structures of time is something that we've heard as well, particularly block scheduling or block time. There is evidence in the research that is effective. Structures of place, so having designated places particularly for Year 7 students as they come into the school. Having that strong sense of belonging to place is really important. And we've heard about, I guess, some of those examples of 2 subject specialist teachers working together with that cohort of kids. There's also some research around groups of students, whether it's a house structure model, so depending on the scale of school. So a house structure may help to help the smaller schools within the big school. And I know Wendy talked about that Wendy Johnson talked about that in our large schools forum, smaller schools within the big school, so that students can be known really well. And in really large schools, and many of our schools are growing, and as Richard said, his school's going from 850 to 1200. Many of our schools are growing. How do we make sure that we retain that sense of knowing the kids in those larger schools? I think there's some opportunities with having Year 7s come in, particularly around some of the banding stuff. So we've heard about this morning. So potentially composite classes at Year 7, 8. So there's some opportunities there. I guess one of those other ways that we can use people is through looping. So whether the home group teacher follows kids up to a certain level. So some schools in the past may have gone 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 all the way, and the teacher follows them through, or they might just go 7, 8, 9, cycle back or loop back to 7. So there's some different models. So it's thinking about what works in your context. So sometimes there's value in having someone go from 9 to 10, so they follow the cohort up into the into the senior school. But it's working out who's best placed to loop with kids and follow them or loop back, and what's the benefit from that. So the other concept we've heard around people, and I guess also time, is the use of meeting or planning time. So thinking through like how do we get time for teachers to collaborate together, or groups to collaborate, and not always the same group. So there might be a level of school group, or it might be a year level group, or it might be a faculty group, or it might be an interdisciplinary group. So what time allocation do we make sure that we provide so people can collaborate and plan together? Because we've heard that is something that is changing the culture of some of the schools we've heard from this morning. And also, obviously, in terms of developing the best teachers is what's the role of professional learning, particularly as we're sort of bringing Year 7s into the high school to create and develop expert teachers at Year 7. And their needs are different to Year 8s from what we've heard from the pilot school so far. So how do we create that strong sense of safe learning environment for those students? Equally is how do we use performance management processes to ensure that we're getting the best out of our teachers as well. So in terms of place, some of the other considerations, particularly for Year 7s as they're coming into the school, is thinking around do they spend the majority of their time in the one room for most of the week? So how do they transition where they've been in the room, one room in primary school for the whole time? How do we transition them into a high school where they're going to be moving more, but maybe not quite as much as 7 times in a day? So thinking through that. Classrooms that are co-located by the lockers to reduce that movement. So the photo that Roger shared around kids were in learning, that's not by accident. That's deliberate thinking through how do we actually make sure kids don't have a reason to move. If their locker's on the other side of the school, then we're giving them a reason to move. So how do we reduce that reason? So having those shared owned spaces is really important. Like I was talking earlier, like I actually think the ownership is really important. If teachers own the classrooms, then students don't own them, and so we get trash spaces because the kids don't feel that strong sense of ownership. If students own them more than teachers, then we also get trash spaces because they think they own them more. So we've got to get that really fine balance between that shared ownership of spaces so that we create that really strong sense of belonging and identity. Something that we've sort of finding from the pilot schools that's unique to Year 7s is having that designated yard space, particularly when they first start. And so they need that space, mostly for the anxiety of the parents, but in the first couple of weeks, having that space available for them is really important. The last thing I think I'll talk about is change management. I think that is something that we need to be talking about, is what is the change management process for review of timetables that you're using? What is the decision-making process? How is this being communicated through to staff and families and students? And I liked what Roger said, ensure the pace of change is right. There's a whole heap of resources on the 7 to High School intranet page, including the Pilot School Insights, so the webinars there for insights from Wirianda. Roger's got his video up there, which is well over 300 views now, and we're about to have the Mitcham Girls video come online as well. So please have a look at those resources, and if there's any questions or support that you may need around that, feel free to give one of the team a call. So thank you, Peter.